Hi, we are delighted to be here to discuss the future of digital finance, payments, and currencies today. I think my co-panelists will all share um, the feeling that this theme is very fascinating, and it's extremely uh, well suited to a tech summit because finance so closely mirrors tech. This includes its ever evolving nature, its complexity, its ability to scale, and perhaps to confound policymakers, regulators, and perhaps even consumers at times. These are also, of course, the very characteristics that make future gazing quite hard. However, I have a fantastic panel with me to try to do that. And that includes Mr. Dharmender Jham, who's the vice president at Paytm, a company which is always in the news, particularly now. I have Mr. Vishal Mehta, who is lead strategic payment partnerships for Microsoft in the Asia Pacific region, and Mr. Suresh Raina, commentator, founder of RSM India and a tax expert. Um, and I think one all pervasive theme, gentlemen, is that the future of finance seems to be turning into a three-way fight between large technology companies that have low customer acquisition costs, between fintech companies that have traditionally been or that are incumbents now in this space and once were, challengers in a sense, and the third being this entire wave of Web 3.0 and decentralized finance that seeks to upend the space entirely and our conceptions of ownership and transactions and so on and so forth. So, without belaboring the point, I would first like to turn to Mr. Dharmender Jham to set the 40,000 feet context, and we'll then drill down to some specific issues right after. But Dharmender, India is a high volume, low value market for digital payments. I don't say this. This is the finding of several committees that have looked into the market structure here. It's traditionally been where um, uh, uh, you know players have found low entry costs over the last 5 or 7 years, and payments now with the proliferation of UPI based services has become almost commoditized. It's a cutthroat market, and in some sense, these factors force specialization on one end of the spectrum and perhaps aggregation and consolidation and concentration on another. The Bank of International Settlements terms this to be a sort of a barbell shaped outcome, wherein fintech markets may be composed of a few large providers on the one end and niche providers, many of them on the other. What is your take on this market? Is this the way we are evolving? And if so, what does it mean for the future of business, future of finance, future of policy making, wherever you'd like to begin?
Sure. Thanks for having me on this panel. And so you have rightly categorized the market into three parts: the large tech companies, the incumbent fintech companies, and banks who have been there for very long. So how this market is going to structure will depend upon. So I'll give you some examples. UPI market or I would say wallet market or bank accounts. So all are contributing to the financial inclusion in this country. All are leveraging based upon primarily three aspects that country has right now. It is, I would like to give this contribution to the government of India running this program of JAM. J is Jandan, that opening bank account, basic saving bank account. Approximately 33 crore plus accounts were opened as part of this scheme, so that the rural market and urban market, every household must have a bank account. That was the uh, purpose of or the objective of the scheme, Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana. So after that, A stands for Aadhaar, and then M stands for mobile. So Aadhaar penetration is so deep. Now we have a very strong digital identity mechanism for doing the KYC. know your customer for customers, for onboarding any merchant, for onboarding any customer on these apps. And last but most important is the underlying hardware, the mobile penetration. India has approximately 100 crore adult population, and 60 to 70% is using the smartphone, and it is believed that it'll be 100% very soon. So now, if we have such a strong foundation, now on top of that, there is a layer of payment modes like UPI, mobile wallets, account-based real-time payments like IMPS. So these actually form the a very strong fundamentals to the financial inclusion and overall the way presently market is structured. Now, how will it evolve? That is second part of your question. Now, we have penetrated the top urban cities, but now in next 5 to 7 years, the market will go in the favor of the companies who will find out solutions, IoT based solutions or AI based solutions for the urban and semi urban segments of the society. Like I give you an example, uh, Fastech has been penetrated, and now Fastech is used at all the toll plazas in of this country. Now, what will be the use case? Two wheelers are not using digital payments much. Will there be a kind of product for them for fuel payments? And I like to highlight that India is a very I would say the small mom and pop stores, they need innovation. Like I give you an example of Paytm product Soundbox. So it gives notification rather than in a voice based message format. So that, and in 16 plus languages, so that whenever you are receiving payments, you need not to check your mobile. If you are not that much literate, you don't need to read SMS every time. You don't need to touch your uh, smartphone every time. Maybe shop owner is not at the shop, you can still hear the notifications. We have like sold approximately 1 million such devices, IoT devices across country. So the answer to your question is the innovation will drive this market in next 5 years, especially in non-urban and rural sector.
Thank you, Dharmender. If I can just add on, this innovation uh, will be both technological and business model innovation. So, which do you think will lead? Just to expand on what you're saying.
Sure. So I would say that on the business model side, we have innovated too much. Now the baseline, the vanilla payments in UPI is free. Now business models are evolving that what should we do after this vanilla payments? If there is no MDR or no payments on just vanilla payments, then how our business model should evolve to have payment use cases that will drive the sustainability. And on the basis of technology, I have already told you that we and this whole industry is evolving in terms of finding out solutions, Aadhaar based solutions, feature phone based solutions, and the smartphone based solutions to drive innovation so that we capture every segment of this market. So I think the urban smartphone making or smartphone using market is well penetrated. Now we have to look beyond this the present market. That will in next 5 year, I believe so that will drive the whole innovation. And if you see, the business model has played lesser role in this whole journey. The technology innovation has played much wider role in last 5 years or so. So I believe that technology will remain the major aspect for further penetration in Indian markets.
So, Vishal, if I can bring you in here, that bodes well, of course, for companies like Microsoft, which is at the cutting edge of so many technologies, and also to provide cloud services and other infrastructure and software services at the back. But why you're here today is also important to point out. You not only provide this kind of back-end infrastructure at a B2B or a B2C level, you're also, one of the touch points that both consumers and other businesses have with the digital economy. And the monetization and commercialization of this touch point, of course, happens through digital payments. It's a gateway to finance in a sense. We've unlocked digital payments, and now we're trying to do a lot to build on the stack of digital finance, whether it be the recent paper on digital banking or other various innovations that we're trying to explore. But just to come back on the digital payments piece, several of your services use subscription payments, and whether it be OTT, cloud, or financial services, subscription seems to have become one of the key ways in which businesses will monetize, as well as consumers will engage with new forms of businesses. You also represent merchants, and I mean merchants in the RBI speak, which is that everybody who's not a fintech provider or a bank in the digital market and is offering goods and services. But these merchants don't necessarily come under the RBI framework, the regulatory framework of the RBI. So just wanted to figure out, how do you situate the future of digital payments and also the regulations that may emanate from the central bank on digital payments and settlement systems that underline them or underlie them rather. How do these new kinds of businesses start to engage with the central bank? What are the types of things we need to unlock in terms of value and regulatory innovation?
No, I think absolutely, Vivan. To add to what Mr. Dharmendra said, regulation is one of the key aspects which is going to decide how the shape of digital payments and digital ecosystem move forward in India. While since the last 3 or 4 years, the digital payments growth has been very rapid, probably one of the fastest growing digital payments across the globe is in India. But there are regulatory aspects which are which one would say might be tying us down, or at least, or maybe even take a couple of steps back. Which is the reason why, along with a few other merchants, we have created some form of a representation to the regulator, essentially raising our hand and saying, while the fintechs, while the banks, the card networks, etc., are part of the payments ecosystem, so are the merchants. And having a regulation which provides guidelines or rules or timelines just to the rest of the ecosystem is not enough. The merchants and the impact on the merchants would have to be considered as well. Take, for instance, the recent recurring payments regulation which came up. I think it is out in the open already, the kind of a negative impact it has had on many merchants. Just today, I was going through an article which talked about uh, uh, the consumers and merchants should not be penalized because the players in the ecosystem are not ready when it comes to the regulation. So I think uh, going forward, when it comes to future of payments, merchants will play an important part. Maybe not in terms of uh, moving towards what's the best payment method, how beautifully a payment can be done, or how fast it can be done, which is what the likes of Paytm and others will be vying for. But as merchants, we want to ensure that the regulators, whether it's the Reserve Bank or the Finance Ministry or the Government of India, when they are bringing in any regulations, they consider the impact which it has on the merchants, which eventually will have on the customers, and we don't become kind of a side effect or a afterthought that, oh yes, we should have considered and spoken with the merchants. So I think as we move towards better payments and even faster growth when it comes to digital payments, merchant participation in regulation formation, in innovation will become very key to progress ahead rather than take a couple of steps back.
Thank you, Vishal. I think that's a good segue to Suresh Surana ji. Suresh, the growing diversity of financial services providers and business models, often requires expanding the regulatory perimeter, something that we've touched on. And while I'm not suggesting that the RBI expand its regulatory perimeter to include merchants, as Vishal represents, but certainly in terms of thinking about the impact on different market participants, that's something that's required. Um, and this holds true for tax, of course, as well. For instance, data reporting may need to be expanded, given the disaggregation that we are seeing in finance, and especially with the emergence of a digital assets economy or a decentralized finance ecosystem. And lawmakers, policymakers, regulators will need a whole lot more data before they're able to sort of discern policy pathways. And that's also something that Vishal alluded to in terms of impact assessments and perhaps extend into regulatory sandboxes, etc. So, do you think the adoption of a targeted regulatory tech solutions, just regulatory innovation, sticking with that theme, may merit serious consideration now that we're seeing yet another wave of disruption in finance?
Yeah. So, Vivian, thank you very much for this very exciting topic. There is no doubt that the financial payment mechanism will see much greater diversity. So, traditionally, what we have seen is the banking system and the cash being used for the settlement of the transactions. Over the last, I would say, 15 years, virtually as far as the banking is concerned, all the transactions are linked to the tax ID number, which is the permanent account number in India. You have the Aadhaar card linkage. So the regulatory authorities and the tax authorities have a complete visibility of whatever transactions are happening through the banking system. Also, the cash economy has shrunk, particularly during COVID, where physical interactions were not feasible. So the legitimate cash economy has actually shrunk in that fashion. And what the greatest advantage of this digital payment, the innovation is what is happening, and what was rightly pointed out at Paytm is a great example. Very small transaction, even a transaction which is as small as 10 cents, or a tea vendor in India on the street side, he is able to accept and receive payment using these digital payment gateways, which through the banking channel was not possible. So I think there is no doubt that they bring a certain value, they bring a certain degree of financial inclusion. The transactions are real time, very low cost, and a much greater penetration. The problem what is there, that as far as the regulators are concerned, they haven't yet got handle around this. So in India, as you know, RBI issued a circular in April 2018, which actually prohibited all the banks from dealing in virtual currencies. Now that was set aside in March 2020 by the Honorable Supreme Court. And now we have a bill before the Parliament for the purpose of cryptocurrencies and the regulation of the official digital currencies. So according to me, I think what we require is that, because today it is totally unregulated, and despite the fact that we have maybe more than 20 million investors from India with more than 10 billion of investment, we want to make sure that there is a proper regulatory oversight. So anyone who is offering, and particularly cross-border instruments, where we see proliferation of the cryptocurrencies every day. And so what we want to make sure that that anyone who offers any crypto asset or any other digital payment gateway is properly registered, and the information about the transaction, there is access available. The identity of the parties, including the KYC, has to be more robust. One reason why all these, even cryptocurrencies, for example, have grown exponentially, because on the one hand, the banking systems have really, tightened a lot on the KYC and money laundering. And that is why, some of the transactions, where people find it more convenient to do through cryptocurrencies. So I think you need a similar, kind of concerted effort from the authorities over the world, including cross-border cooperation. Because if you see OECD, G20, the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, came together to push the banking system to share the information even for cross-border transactions. So I think what you really need is you need a regulatory, a regulator with whom anyone who is offering these payment solutions is registered, and there is proper KYC and the transaction details are available to the regulators. The second thing point which you made is it is also very important that there is a clarity about the tax treatment. Right now, even in India, whether you talk about direct taxes or you talk about GST, still there is no official statement from the government about how they are going to tax it. So I will come to it maybe a little later as to what is the taxation. But I think a great deal of clarity and certainty will help people to comply with the regulations. And third thing, obviously, is the reporting by the by the various participants of their digital transactions as well as their digital assets. So all these three things are required. On the other hand, I think as you asked about how can the tax authorities regulate, today the tax authorities are able to regulate or able to monitor all the banking transactions very closely. The advantage with the digital payment gateways is, or all the digital payment mechanism is that they are completely, there is a digital footprint available. So if the authorities also use technology, which I'm sure they will, using data analytics, using forensics, they can use continuous monitoring tools to really see where things are not happening in the proper manner or whatever they want to go for greater investigation. So I think, according to me, there is no doubt that the use of the technology by regulators is going to be the only way they can monitor these transactions. And so this will achieve all the objectives, of having greater empowerment, of more and more people embracing digital, payment mechanism, even at a very low end of the spectrum of the transaction value, and at the same time having a proper tax compliance, proper regulatory compliance, not having those participants whose credentials are not above board and which can result in defrauding of the investors. So I think probably, but it may take, it will take a few years to evolve. What we have seen that even banking system took a long time to come to this stage. Even the social media, for example, what you are seeing, even now governments are grappling with how to regulate it as compared to the print media or television media. I think we will see a similar thing happening here with this new revolution, what you call it, Web 3.0, which is bringing a completely new dimension to the entire payment mechanism.
Thank you, Suresh. Extremely fascinating thoughts, a lot to pick up on regulatory tech. But to bring in Dharmender again, one of the points that Suresh was making was around, the disruption of banking. And on the one hand, banks have, and I see every day on social media complaints around how long banks take to respond to consumer grievances, how long it takes to open a new account. Just today, I was helping out an entrepreneur who's well-to-do with a bank account which hasn't opened for 2 weeks, and it's immediate need for fundraisers and so on and so forth. We still face these kind of issues, but at this in the banking ecosystem. But at the same time, it also represents an ecosystem that is established, that has real tangible revenue streams. We still see a lot of even fintech players wanting ultimately banking licenses, and you have had this whole conversation on digital banking for partly this reason. People require that sort of cycle of earning interest on deposits and so on and so forth, because it's established, perhaps the oldest business model in the world, or second oldest at the very least. And so, how does this reconcile against disruption? Because even to take that example that you gave of MDR existing mechanism, I can almost equate it to banking, because time accelerates as technology moves on, and we're seeing much shorter cycles of disruption. But we haven't seen a disruption of a nature where the MDR as an incentive is no longer something that allows the ecosystem to grow or for value to deepen. So how does that reconcile? Just business model disruption with monetization and commercialization imperative, because I think both have to go along with the technology, the pace of technology growth that you've already alluded to.
Sure. So I'll break your question into parts. So first part that you have mentioned about the set of challenges that even now also customers are facing with the banking services. So I think fintechs in the country have worked towards in solving those problems. If you see, and even RBI uh, has conceptualized this differential banking licenses for small finance and payments bank, and these two innovative models, when it was conceptualized, actually were formed to fill the needs of customers in these sector. Like for payments drive the financial inclusion, because and also small finance banks have been formed to ensure that the lending needs of the grassroots people are actually fulfilled. So I think fintechs are driving financial inclusion and trying to solve problem related to grievances. And I'll tell you, the problems are no more. I'm not saying that it has become zero. That country in India has been like pioneer in real time payments. If you see IMPS, immediate mobile payment system, was launched in 2010, 11 years back, where real time payments were settled. And now we have reached as a stage. Now we don't need to wait for large value payments like RTGS or NEFT to we have to wait that today is a bank holiday, so payments will not be processed, large value payments will not be processed. Now these are also working 365 days. RBI has made that possible for common people. So now, if you see, the large value payments, small value payments, all are available to be made 365 days. That's a innovation in itself. And also, I like to add to this, the failure rates or the robustness of this overall ecosystem is very high. And if you go through the NPCI website, NPCI publishes the transaction decline rates. So transaction decline rates on the platforms, even I'll talk about a Paytm's platform on UPI, which is in the range of 0.01%, which is lowest among uh, all the players. So the decline rates, the consumers payments failing, it has reduced so much. Now the problems of payment stuck, payments, money has been deducted from my account, doesn't get credited into somebody else's account, that is also getting. Now there are real time dispute resolution systems have been brought in place to cater to all those grievances. This is about technology. Now I'll come to your part on the commercial. Now, how to make this, how to make ourselves fintechs, if you're doing so much of investment in technology, in creating penetration, so how to make this business model sustainable? I'll tell you that now gone are the days when pure play payments should be charged. Now this is like, I give you an example. If suppose search or email would be paid, then would you have like in past, will you see such level of usage that has driven the usage for us? Search was free, but still there is a business model behind it. Email is free, but still there is a business model behind it. So now, because there is innovation, and they started people to use the platform, and then they added the value added services. So I think that is a business model that payments industry is also looking at. So we cannot, because if we want to do the financial inclusion and bring remaining set of people in the on the digital payment systems, or the part, we are required to make the part of the digital economy, then we cannot make it paid. So I believe that the business model is required to be evolved. We cannot be dependent upon the traditional modes of payments, or getting margins on the traditional modes of payments, which is there globally, I would say. But India has
So,
evolved too much in technology. I believe that on business model also we are evolving, and we are working towards the self-sustainable business models for fintech ecosystem also.
so Dharmender, in a minute of a rejoinder, I just want you to also take the bull by its horns. You mentioned that value-added services are where some of this commercialization is going to happen. Google and others are, that's how they operate, and data, of course, is in itself somewhat of a business model. how are you going to compete with sort of large tech companies as a fintech company in this space?
So I would say that it's not either fintech or bank or any other tech company. The business models are common. The innovation is common. The way everybody is offering their services, there are some commons and there are some innovations which we are doing and which other companies or other types of companies are also doing. So there is no basis is the structure of the company these models are based on. So these may vary depending
Yeah,
upon the priorities, depending
I hear
upon
you.
the penetration that we are planning to get into.
I hear you, and I think Dharmender, much of what you're saying is also sort of a consumer led lens in a sense. You build trust with consumers. That's also the business that Vishal is in. And so I want to turn now to Vishal to bring him in on this question of, Vishal, you mentioned there's an ecosystem at play when the regulator thinks about any particular intervention. It should start to think about it from a readiness standpoint, um, because there's constant technological evolution, but also the consumer may be at different levels of literacy, merchants may be at different levels of adoption. So you have a multi-speed ecosystem in a sense. And I just want you to unpack how a regulator or in a sort of a limited state capacity environment, we can deal with some of these ecosystem readiness issues.
I think, Vivan, that's a great point because we have seen similar aspects being addressed in other parts of the globe. If I take Europe, for example, there was a PSD2 regulation which came up. I think it's been almost 3 or 4 years when it was first announced, and there is still the level of readiness of all the issuers and the ecosystem is not right there. However, piece by piece, as the issuers get ready, it gets unblocked, and more and more customers come onto a PSD2 compliant framework. Similarly, I think one key piece which the regulator can really do is not just announce a regulation, but kind of form a team or form a group, a committee which can guide in terms of what are the best practices which they expect to follow. For example, tokenization. The regulator said tokenization is now going to be allowed. There are 3 months which are there for the card storage regulations, and tokenization has to be completed in that time. So, in announcing that, there is some level of obliviousness to watch what is achievable and what is not in that limited time frame. I think if the regulator walks the talk and helps in when it comes to execution or even formation of the right strategy there for the ecosystem, that would help in creating some realistic timelines, some realistic or graduated timelines for different parts of the ecosystem, and help out there. So at the end of the day, the regulator and all of us in the ecosystem want the same thing. The customer should be protected, and the customer should be in the best position. However, the time which it takes to reach there, that should not be very disruptive, as is being seen in the recurring regulation and potentially in the card storage regulation. So, as a regulator, if I were the regulator, along with announcing the regulations, along with announcing the rules, I would go ahead and say that these are the rules, and I formed a committee which in three months' time will give me a high level either API documentation or some level of standardization, which will be easy for the rest of the ecosystem to adopt, rather than finding who's the best or who's the fastest in creating a solution and everyone's scouting for that.
Thank you, Vishal. But just to pick up on this issue of standardization, when you have such heterogeneity in a market, as is the case with the merchants ecosystem, where you have plenty of startups, entrants, people who are just trying to make a living online, and then you have larger, mature, organized platforms. How what level of standard setting is sort of uh, is par for the course. Because, for instance, you mentioned two issues around tokenization and card on file storage, and I remember that a few years ago, the RBI itself had brought out a discussion paper where it had lauded a particular standard, the PCI DSS standard, which can be used by merchants to store data securely and make sure that personal data and sensitive data is stored in a way that is sort of not accessible to those who are seeking to exploit vulnerable users. So, but that's also a level of standardization that perhaps is not accessible to the average online merchant. So how do you bridge those two worlds? There is a role for cross-pollination, I'm sure, and some degree of social responsibility towards that, as far
Yeah,
as organized large providers are concerned.
no, absolutely. I think which is where India is a curve ahead when it comes to the business models which are already there in terms of payments. The existence of payment aggregators and payment gateways are helping bridge those gaps for for the startups and for the MSMEs, which may or may not have that level of expertise. In addition, what has happened thanks to the regulation also is that the bigger size merchants have realized, well, this is an opportunity for us as a merchants ecosystem to come together and help each other, which is where MPI as as an alliance, we are trying to educate the rest of the merchants in the best practices which are there to implement payment systems, irrespective of whether that's a one person show or that's about 100,000 employees. Irrespective of that, there are best practices for each type of business, and Empire is very much looking forward to educate and help each type of merchant in this particular space.
So Vishal,
The
just
other
just for the sake of the audience, the MPI would be Merchant Payments Alliance of India, a new group which seeks to foster digital payments and deepen them.
Yes, that's the goal of Empire. We want to ensure that everyone which is a member of Empire, the merchants, and which also impacts the consumers, are well placed to ensure that payments is not a headache for them, and they are well equipped to adopt any new regulation in the most seamless manner.
Thank you, Vishal. If I may turn to Suresh, some of the things that you said were very interesting because you said there are so many small entities that are transacting, and that includes consumers, the average retail consumer. Uh, so much more participation in digital financial markets and digital markets more generally. Uh, and this tension between aggregation and disaggregation, it also manifests in the way that you think about tax policy as a construct, and usually the way that such conundrums are solved, and I don't know if you agree with it, is to catch a hold of some of the largest intermediaries in these ecosystems, particularly those that have many players. Like, for instance, the crypto ecosystem, you have so much participation. By some numbers, it's already half of the total stock market investors in the country, because there are about 30 million stock market investors and about 15 million uh, of those 15 million total people invested in cryptocurrencies as well in India. So it's a large market, and traditionally in the financial ecosystem, you got a hold of banks and then fintechs. Now, who's next? Is it going to be exchanges that will be the locus of figuring out tax and KYC and money laundering and FEMA and all these other things, constructs that come in? And of course, tax is fairly central to the ethos around this.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I don't think there's any doubt about that because it is very difficult for the tax authorities to get hold of individuals and and merchants who are doing various transactions. But even if you see what has happened in case of banks, mainly the regulation has been to get the banks to comply with the money laundering, anti-money laundering regulation, KYC regulation, extensive reporting, even FATCA reporting. So I think you are going to see a similar thing. And what I mentioned also at the beginning, that probably some of the exchanges who are dealing in cryptos and who want to offer their products in the particular country may have to register themselves and get regulated and agree to share the information pertaining to transactions with that country's residents or citizens or taxpayers, so that they can see that it is not used for the purpose of unaccounted income or unaccounted assets, or for purposes which are not completely legitimate. I think that is the primary concern right now. I think that if you I would like to divide in two parts. I don't think anybody has a problem with the digital payments per se. Like for example, what Paytm is doing. I mean, they are complying with the KYC requirement. They are also getting all the information what is required by the regulators. The problem what partly is having with the cross-border cryptocurrencies, which are relatively not only they are not regulated, but the information is not available with the tax authorities. I think that is where the biggest issue, and some of the people have made phenomenal gains, and there is no clarity whether they have paid tax on those gains or not. You see the values which have gone up. Some of the in case of some of the cryptocurrencies, it has gone up 100 times or even much more than that in the last 10 years. So I think there are legitimate concerns of the taxpayers, of the tax regulators in this. And the only way it can happen, I think I would see that one is that it has to happen through concerted efforts of the tax authorities around the world, just like the FATF or OECD did, that anyone who is offering cryptos in a cross-border situation must agree to share the information with the regulators. And also, I think on the other hand, the tax authorities have to also come out with, I would say, two things. One is the certainty of taxation, and secondly, it should be reasonable tax. Like for example, in India, there is most of the people are taking a view that it is a capital asset, and whatever they're making profit, it is subject to capital gains. If you hold it for more than 3 years, then the rate of tax is 20%. And if it is less than 3 years, then you pay it as a normal tax rate in terms of your slabs, which is reasonable. But if, for example, it is taxed at a higher rate, or or it is entire there is another element which is not very clear, whether it is a business income or whether it is a capital gain. Now, if it's a business income, then entire thing is taxed at the normal tax rate, which could be as high as 42.7%. Similarly, there is no clarity about the GST, for example, because GST, whether it is goods or service, what is exempted under the GST law is basically anything which is a currency or which is a security. It does not qualify under either of those two. So again, if there is a 18% GST applicable, and in a cross-border situation, who will pay the GST, whether it is the seller or the
That's a
buyer?
very interesting point. I just want to delve into that deeper, since by the time this airs, we are pre-recording this for the audience, and just to make sure this is a seamless experience for everybody. If tomorrow there is some clarity around taxation, around GST or income tax treatment, what happens to the last couple of years of transactions that may have happened? You apply a sort of a retrospective moratorium. What would you like to happen?
Yeah, I think absolutely, whether it is the taxation or even in terms of the regulated, in terms of the digital payment or the cryptocurrencies, the people who have already invested, there has to be a transition mechanism. For example, suppose if you say that certain cryptocurrencies are not allowed because they are not, regulated in India or they are not being registered, then also you have to allow an exit to the people who already invested when there was no clear regulatory framework. Similarly, on taxation side, once you announce that this is what the view of the tax authorities is, then you have to allow people, if at all they've taken a different position, then they can correct their position, and either they can revise the returns or they can offer it basically for taxation based on if they agree and if they don't want to contest the position of the tax authorities. I think a transitional smooth mechanism is very important in an evolving subject like this, where nobody is very clear. You have extreme viewpoints on regulations. On the one hand, an absolute ban versus just a regulation, and secondly, on taxation, from being completely not subject to tax to being taxed in a very punitive manner. I think you need a very, I would say, a fairly good ecosystem which considers all the stakeholders, so that we can have an evolution which is more orderly and more structured of the entire system.
Thank you, Suresh ji, and to everyone else. I think it's been a fascinating discussion, and what I take away from it is that business innovation, as Dharmender ji said, it's happened already. It's a lot of it has happened. Technology innovation is inevitable and inexorable, and therefore the big question mark is whether we'll have regulatory innovation in this country, which enables both the other components to flourish. And I think partly you've given some clues in this conversation, whether it is Vishal's ecosystem view, where you look at the entire value chain and you look at the impact on everybody in the value chain, and whether it is proportionate, disproportionate, whatever it is, you sort of configure that into the regulatory view that you take. And the words that you used, Suresh ji, I think have been echoed aplenty in various judgments that pertain to economic regulation, which is proportionate, graded. And I think these are some of the terms that must become non-negotiable first principles for policy making and regulation in this country, for businesses such as yours to really flourish. And along with the United States of America, India can remain a frontier market for or a market for frontier innovation as far as digital is concerned. I think we have a leg up here, and we must not give up that advantage that our software products industry has created and you guys have taken forward. So thank you very much for joining us today for this round in the West Coast Summit. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm very excited to engage in a fireside chat with Shweta Rajpal Kohli, who heads public policy for Sequoia Capital in India. And this fireside chat, comes on the heels of very exciting developments happening in digital finance in India. I think top of mind is the recent Niti Aayog document, which looks at the topic of digital banking. So Shweta, I'm very happy to be here with you and discuss some of these disruptions. And I think a good point of departure from a conceptual standpoint is that while regulatory innovation has catalyzed the payment sector reforms, and this is something that the report also notes, now it seems to be almost holding back the delivery of credit. And so we need a sort of new disruption here. And the digital banks idea perhaps stems from this yawning gap that we continue to see in terms of the credit market, the demand and the supply, the addressable gap, and so on and so forth. So why do you think that digital banks may be a good idea for India, which of course is, we have to keep in mind various other concerns, including the fact that we have vulnerable segments of society here that towards which fiduciary responsibility is perhaps the thresholds are higher than in other jurisdictions that may be more mature, and traditionally the regulator has also taken incremental steps towards unbundling banking, so to speak. So just your thoughts on how this space is evolving, how we can use policy as a lever for growth, and the digital banks paper and the future.
Thank you so much, Vivan. All very exciting questions and great to be here chatting with you about digital banking. And yes, we are very enthused and excited about the new paper that Niti Aayog has released that talks about putting in place a regulatory regime for digital banking in India. And why we're excited about it, because we really believe that we've reached that inflection point, so to say, as far as the fintech industry is concerned, where the next big disruption, the next big growth lever will now come from digital banking. So just if we step back and see what has happened in India in the digital payment space, I mean, we've seen an explosion, and all of us know, look back 10 years, and who would have thought that India would have perhaps the most advanced and mature digital payments ecosystem in the world. I mean, 10 years ago, we were even talking about how India is such a cash-driven economy and society that we're never going to see that transition to digital payments. And the push that the government gave, whether it was demonetization, Aadhaar, UPI, I mean, those have been fantastic innovations led by the government, led by regulatory push that have actually enabled an entire digital payments ecosystem to flourish. So that was FinTech 1.0 as far as India is concerned. And now we're saying it's time for the second phase of this FinTech growth to emerge. And on the back of the revolution that we've seen, we now believe that it's time to leverage technology in its true spirit and allow FinTech companies to be full-scale digital banks. But what we're saying when we refer to the term digital banks is a little different from neobanking as we know it, and also different from obviously traditional or incumbent banking. So just if I could spend a couple of minutes explaining that, incumbent banks come with their own challenges. These are banks that have physical branches. These are banks that are obviously regulated by the banking regulator, but they come with their own challenges, and we are all well aware of the kind of issues that the banking industry is facing. But in between now we have an entire gamut of neobanks, sort of technology-led fintech companies that are sitting on top of these incumbent banks, but delivering very high-end tech-led, user services to customers, as well as, which by customers I mean both retail customers as well as business customers. So we've seen that evolution has already taken place, and neobanking is now a growing trend where everyone is realizing the power of technology to deliver financial services as well as banking services, and that is happening. But we're still seeing that we're in that phase where these tech companies are sitting on top of the basic layer and foundation that incumbent banks have. And that, while it seems to be working and it's a great trend, we still need to now graduate to the end that we're seeing many other countries like Singapore, Malaysia, evolve, which is, India is now ready for full-scale digital banking, where some of these fintech companies that get licensed and regulated by a regulator, which would likely be the RBI itself, will be full-service banks without having physical branches. So the difference in a digital and a physical bank, as the name suggests, is the fact that these digital banks will be full-service banks offering tons of user-friendly tech enabled services, but will not have physical branches. And we feel that's the way forward. I'll pause there, but I do want to respond to some of your concerns that you have raised with regard to the RBI address.
I'll make your job harder and add one more concern that you can address in the next minute, which is around this fear that the RBI has already dismissed the prospects of corporates entering into the banking sphere. And there's also this latent fear in the policy ecosystem of this digital banks becoming a sort of a back road entry of corporates into universal banking. How do you deal with that fear, because it's a real thing and you have to address it. And secondly, if we have the time for it, what does it mean for fintechs to move away from what their core business proposition or customer service proposition is? Do they get saddled with stuff they need to do that they're not, that might not be core to how they have engineered themselves? And does that become problematic? How do you address that as you scale as a business? And I'm sure venture capitalists like you or like Sequoia would have to address that challenge sitting on the boards.
Right, everyone, I cannot tell you the palpable excitement and energy that we have amongst all our fintech companies to take advantage of what we're terming digital banking, and what it can do for India's MSME sector. And why I want to point that out, because I think to your point, yes, we understand there are fears and apprehensions that a regulator will have, because for a very highly regulated industry like banking, you do require to put in place checks and balances, and at no point are we suggesting that any of that needs to be diluted. Yes, of course, we're suggesting a highly regulated regime for these digital banks, but a regime that will also understand that technology can be a very powerful, engine for delivering the kind of growth that we require. Look at the credit market, that we think the MSME sector is poised towards. I mean, that's a huge challenge and an unmet gap that these fintech companies can deliver, which is why perhaps even the Niti Aayog paper pointing towards a step-by-step approach towards a digital banking regime, where we can perhaps kick it off first by looking at more B2B digital banking, a banking which is addressed more to to the MSME segment or to the business segment, and then eventually move it to the retail segment when the regulator has got comfort around how this will work. So I think that is one way of taking care of concerns that regulators may have around, what this would mean. To your other point, I think, Vivan, we've reached a point where, wishing away or just closing our eyes to what technology can do in this space is not going to help the economy, because at the end of the day, the potential that India has today to be able to take advantage of these very niche segments, imagine a time where fintech companies can have very tailor-made banking experiences without the need for physical branches for very specific user segments, women entrepreneurs, or within the MSME sector, one part of that MSME sector, and fintechs are ready with that offering. They're ready to go ahead and tap all of these, but they require the regulatory regime and the regulatory firepower to be able to do what a full service bank today is doing, whether it's in terms of deposits or in terms of loans. Because unless we allow them that, we're not going to see the true power of fintech being unleashed. But yes, we understand, we recognize, and which is why I think we're very fortunate that at least Niti Aayog for now has taken out a paper and has invited comments, and I think many of our fintech companies in our portfolio are very excited to engage with policymakers and regulators to help them understand what this could mean for India.
Thank you, Shweta. With great power comes great responsibility, as they say. And I think it's a good sign if companies in this sensitive ecosystem are not looking to move fast and break things, but as you said, do things in a graded way where they're tested, whether in a sandbox environment or outside of a sandbox, but in an experimental environment where harms and liabilities and risks and remedies can all be mapped, over time, so that the Indian retail user, consumer of financial and banking services is better off. And I think that's ultimately the goal of all businesses and investors and entrepreneurs, because without that, you don't have a business case. So thank you very much for joining us today at the West Coast Summit, Shweta.
Thank you, Vivan. Great to be here on the show.
It gives me immense pleasure to congratulate entire team of US-India Business Council for organizing the US-India Business Council West Coast Summit this year. I appreciate USIBC for inviting me to this summit, for sharing my views on government's approach to innovation-led disruptions in telecom sector and overall US-India digital relationship. India-US business relations have developed into a global strategic partnership based on shared democratic values and increasing convergence of interest on bilateral, regional, and global issues. The emphasis placed by the Government of India on development and good governance has created opportunity to reinvigorate bilateral ties and enhance cooperation between the two countries. Today, US-India bilateral relationship is broad-based and multi-sectoral, covering trade and investment, defense and security, education, science and technology, cybersecurity, high technology, civil nuclear energy, space technology and applications, clean energy, environment, agriculture, and health. Now coming to the today's topic. that is government's approach to innovation-led disruption in telecom sector, we may see that telecom sector has experienced maximum number of technologies-based disruptions. By the time the existing technology gets fully deployed, a new technology knocks at the door and declares its arrival. Another feature of these disruptions is fast-paced convergence in technologies at different levels. Technological convergence, in general, refers to the trend or phenomenon where two or more independent technology integrate and form a new outcome. The world is experiencing the technological convergence at different levels, such as media convergence, network convergence, and device convergence. Now, due to technological convergence, while a technology could be used to deliver multiple services, simultaneously multiple technologies could also be used to deliver a particular service. The examples of converging services and applications include voice over the internet, data services over the broadcasting platforms, and webcasting of audiovisual content. Convergence is taking place in the entire value chain of service delivery to the end users. The same content is being delivered in many formats and through multiple formats. The user devices like radio, TV, mobile, sensor, etc. used to consume such content are also performing multiple functions. Earlier, a user was required to purchase specific device and seek specific subscriptions from different service providers for consuming each type of content or services. But now, multiple services can be subscribed from a single service provider and consumed over a single device. This requires that the regulators and policymakers should proactively follow the technological developments, predict the innovation-led disruptions, and manage the disruption effectively and constructively. And it should also seize the opportunity and convert these disruptions into benefits for the industry, consumers, and the economy. At the tech, as the technology-driven services are pervading into all economic verticals, the innovation-led disruptions are going to make a ripple in all the sectors simultaneously. It is therefore imperative for both the telecoms regulator as well as the sector regulators to follow a calibrated approach with flexible, agile, adaptive policy and regulations in a collaborative manner. Technological innovation and digital technologies have transformed the world and have become ubiquitous catalyst for digital transformation. With technology-driven growth in the sectors like healthcare, fintech, education, e-commerce, and manufacturing, India is all set to become the hub of digital transformation. As per the ITU report, India's share in the global cellular mobile subscription is 16%, which is quite substantial. The pace of transformation will further accelerate as a result of cutting-edge technology such as 5G, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, robotic process automation, augmented reality, virtual reality, data analytics, etc. 5G and IoT are in particular giving rise to numerous use cases such as smart cities, smart transportation, smart manufacturing, smart agriculture, remote medical consultations, industrial automation, smart mining, and new types of interactive consumer entertainment. And this is across industry verticals. Ericsson has estimated that digitalization revenue potential in India will be above 27 US dollar by 2026. The government of India has taken many timely steps to harness the potential of cutting-edge technologies for the benefit of everyone. And we all here have commitment to do so. To handle this technological disruption, government and TRAI has come out with a lot of policy changes. For example, telecom tariff is under forbearance, licenses are made technology neutral, spectrum assignment is done through market-based process, policies are in place for robust R&D ecosystem. India has improved its ease of doing business ranking tremendously in the last few years. Licensing regime has been simplified. Policies in particular are aligned with latest technological development. TRAI now follows principles of adopting regulations based on forbearance and light touch regulations. I should point out that the radical telecom reforms which have been declared recently by the government of India is further reflection of the government's resolve in that direction. Our Prime Minister Digital India program is designed to transform India into a knowledge-based and digitally empowered society. Today, Digital India is transforming the lives of millions of Indians, giving them services in the remotest parts of India. It is estimated that India's digital economy has the potential to reach $1 trillion by 2025. As part of the Digital India, government has enrolled more than 1.32 billion Indians in the biometric digital identity program called Aadhaar. Direct benefit transfer schemes have been linked with Aadhaar, in which benefits of the government schemes are directly transferred uh, to target beneficiary account through online means. More than 440 million bank accounts have been opened under the Prime Minister's Jan Dhan Yojana for providing them online direct benefit transfer. The number of monthly financial transactions through unified payment interface has exceeded 4 billion transactions every month. More than 12.1 million businesses have been brought into a common digital platform through goods and service tax system. Online digital services have also been provided in rural areas through common service centers where the digital services and e-governance services are available, covering multiple services across the sectors. Online education has also been made available throughout the country. To manage the technology-led disruptions effectively and constructively, TRAI and government have taken many initiatives proactively. Government has government has formulated a forward-looking national digital communication policy in 2018. This details 5-year growth trajectory and targets for remote, hilly, far-flung and island areas. The mobile operator can use the satellite-based cellular backhaul connectivity through VSAT operators. This ensures uninterrupted mobile broadband coverage in rural areas. TRAI has recently released a consultation paper to facilitate establishment of earth stations gateways by satellite operators. The BharatNet project, aiming to connect all the local bodies, that is group of villages, through optic fiber for provisioning of broadband services, has connected more than 170,000 local bodies by laying more than 500,000 kilometers of optical fiber. It is also helping to meet ever-growing demand of rural connectivity. TRAI has recently forwarded its recommendation to the government for facilitating satellite-based connectivity for IoT and low-bit rate applications. The IoT will revolutionize the digital ecosystem as billions of devices, services and systems become connected. IoT devices will have terrestrial as well as satellite-based connectivity. TRAI has given its recommendation to ensure broadband for all in August this year, recommending constitutions of a national ROW council to give time-bound permissions for ROW. It has also suggested incentivizing fixed line services in the country. The digital economy has given rise to two important challenges to be taken care of, that is privacy and data protection. We have given our recommendations to the government on privacy, security, ownership of the data in 2018. To attract investment FDI in telecom sector, TRAI has recommended in August 2021 that a separate authorization under unified license should be created for access network provider, that is network layer, to provide network services on wholesale basis. This may invite new players in the market and will provide a boost to the VNO players also. TRAI is also coming out with a consultation paper for promoting data economy through establishment of data centers, content delivery networks and interconnected exchange. Through this paper, we are trying to boost the establishment of data centers in India by removing bottlenecks, promoting ease of doing business and incentivizing of establishment of data centers and data park in the country. The Indian telecom sector is the third largest sector in terms of FDI inflows, contributing 7% of the total FDI inflow. Further, the recently announced production-linked incentive scheme has attracted huge investment in the telecom manufacturing. We can harness the potential of cutting-edge technologies for the benefit of everyone. However, international cooperation among the countries is required for sustained development. Technology voids can be filled by facilitating technology transfer and by translating technologies into locally relevant products and services. strengthened international cooperation and participation in digital sector will see a positive impact of frontier technologies on sustainable development. There is a huge scope for growth between India and US in digital economy. India's competitive benefits of cost, skilled manpower, and huge domestic market demand combined with US innovation and investment can become a winning partnership among the natural allies. The move towards an inclusive and sustainable future by recognizing the transformative power of cutting edge technologies can be addressed through a well articulated government approach, effective regulatory mechanism, and international coordination with multi stakeholders. At last, I compliment US India Business Council once again for organizing this summit and convey my best wishes for the success of the event. Thank you.